This segment, we've invited Pastor Bobby Freddy to address you. I know Pastor Bobby Freddy for over, I think, should be about 3 or 4 years over emails and correspondence and telephone calls, and I met him today for the first time. Pastor Bobby Freddy is a very sincere Christian man, and we feel that he's very, very soft-hearted and well-natured. And I know when you get many of the Christian apologists who would insult the Muslims or speak to the Muslims in an abusive or aggressive manner, Pastor Freddy is one of the first to speak out to his own congregation and tell them to have respect, manners, and etiquettes when dealing with people of other faiths. So I thank you, Pastor Freddy.
Thank you. Good morning. This morning, I want to address you from a Christian perspective, why I believe what I believe. A lot of people know what they believe in most faiths, but they don't know why they believe. So as a Christian apologist, I'm going to tell you today, as a Christian, why I believe what I believe. There is a wide misconception among atheists, skeptics, agnostics, and some religious organizations, and it's saying that the Bible, Gospels of the Bible are not eyewitness testimony. So I want to show you today evidence what I believe to be sufficient enough to believe that the Bible is eyewitness evidence. The Gospels, okay, are the eyewitness evidence, okay? You see, of the 4 Gospels, you got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. One, Matthew is a tax collector. Mark is an ordinary citizen. You got Luke, who's a doctor, and John, who is a fisherman. The question to ask is, are these 4 men, are they eyewitnesses? You will notice that in your readings from skeptics, agnostics, and some religious sector, they'll tell you no. Now, the key factor needed for historical believability is eyewitness accounts that were accurately and faithfully recorded by those whom you can trust, who had no ulterior motives for themselves, but to hand out eyewitness evidence of what? Now, what I'm going to do today quickly, the time is a factor, the other gentleman took the extra, and Mulana Panda also Panda that's come after me, is I'm going to show you quickly that the Bible, the 4 Gospels, we have early testimony, we have eyewitness testimony, we have expected testimony, what you would expect from them, and nothing else. We have extra biblical testimony outside of the Bible, historical, archaeological. Now, the question always arises, who wrote the Gospels? You see one there with a question mark and blocked is here because it is said that none of these wrote the Gospel. And there are reasons why they say that. And we need to address that. There was a clip in the cartoon, okay, Liz to Ned. He says, how do you know the guys who wrote the Bible just did not make all the stuff up? In other words, they just faked it. Good question. The problem of the nameless Gospels, because the Gospels in the manuscript evidence that they discovered haven't got those names, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And that's created a big problem. And When you say anonymous, you mean that you don't know who wrote it. Is that true? Is that evidence enough? Bart Ehrman, a Christian, most Muslims know about him. Okay, he studied a diploma with the Moody Bible Institute. He went to Wheaton College. He went to Princeton University where he got his PhD. And very clever man, very intelligent man. He has written many books against the Bible now. And one of the things he says is about the title of the Gospels were not put there by the authors. Today, he is an atheist. Not because, in his writings, you would read, not because of the Bible, because of a question that no religious, he feels, including the Bible, can answer. His question is, he asked, if God is good, and God is powerful, we say, you see in Islam, you say, Allahu Akbar, God is greater. We say God is almighty. He says, if God is greater, God is almighty, why can't he stop this evil in this world? There's so much of evil and suffering. And because of that, he couldn't find the answer. Today, he's an atheist. Now, the Gospels are not completely anonymous. This is something that the skeptics, atheists, agnostics have to be told, and I'm telling them that with much confidence. You see, it is true that none of the canonical four Gospels directly name its author. What's the problem? Let's be honest. You heard what the previous lecturer said, give an inch and go a mile. So I'm giving that inch now. Yes, concede that none of the canonical four Gospels directly name its authors. I concede. The Gospels are not synonymous in the sense that the authors don't give, the authors are synonymous, the Gospels are anonymous in the sense that the authors don't give the names in the body of the text that they are writing. That's all. They don't give. Like here, I got a book here, says here, Ahmad Didat, the man and his mission, Ghulam Wahid. Okay, so the Gospel doesn't say the author's name. Is that create a problem? So we need to understand. We need to understand, like what the great commentators and classical commentators, including Yusuf Ali and others say, you must read it in context, in the times it was written, to the culture it was written, why it was written, the way it was written, that you could better understand the Quran. So similarly now, you need to understand in the first century the culture of writing and how they did things. Just because the Gospel does not contain the name of the authors does not necessarily mean we can never know who wrote or who the real authors are. Plutarch. It was not unusual for ancient authors to leave the names of the words. Plutarch was a great author who penned more than 50 biographies of great men of ancient times. During the late 1st to early 2nd century, Plutarch's name is absent from all of them. It is a tradition that has been passed down through the centuries that gives us information pertaining to who wrote these biographies. I read the Quran. I had a lot of difficulties until a good friend of mine from the Islamic Propagation Center told me there are certain things you will not understand without the hadiths. So I got myself Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim. Sahih is authentic. I may not agree with everything, but at least it helps me to understand what the Quran says. When it says something, I look at it in its context, because at the culture of the day, there was oral tradition. And much of the oral tradition only gathered over 200 years later. And it was painful to say which is authentic, which is not so authentic, which is weak. I had to study all that because I need to understand the Quran. So I am asking people of other faiths. I respect, but let me tell you what I believe and why I believe. So nobody ever questions that Plutarch is the author of those over 50 biographies. There was some problem here. Anyway, Tacitus, the Roman historian, he wrote annals, and like Plutarch, he never, in annals, there's no name who the author is. Not even on the first page, not even included inside. But he wrote something very important about Alexander the Great. And all scholars, historical scholars, refer to Tacitus's volume, the Annals of History, to get information about Alexander the Great. And many of you will be familiar with Alexander the Great because there were some predictions made in the Quran. Now, the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, there is no competing tradition of authorship. There is no record of any other authorship being attributed to the canonical Gospels. Not one. We have searched, I have searched. I've written to many organizations. There is not one person in ancient history as disputed that the four Gospels were written by the ones Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It is very unlikely that these canonical writings would have circulated anonymously. If I wrote a book and manuscript, I didn't put my name over there, because at the time, the culture of the day, most people didn't do that, and I gave it to the gentleman. And I tell you, it's from me, I've written this, Bobby Freddy. So he will, the oral tradition, say, hey, I got a book by the guy who came to IPCI, Bobby Freddy. He gave me this book that he has written. But I didn't take his autograph, and there's no name his author, but I met him personally, and there's a book. And the guy says to him, hey, how's the book? Very interesting. I need a copy for my organization. So that, in those days, they wrote by hand, and they passed it on. The tradition itself compares more than favorably to other traditions of authorship of ancient writers. Let's take this. Angel Gabriel gives a revelation to Prophet Muhammad. Prophet Muhammad got his close companions of his, Zaid, etc. Not Zaid, sorry. Zaid is the one that compiled it with Uthman. Okay, anyway, to write it down. Prophet Muhammad did not write it down personally himself, but he had a revelation. He passed it on to his early companions, 4 of them, and he asked them to write it down. They wrote down in pieces of what you call leather, whatever they had at the time, wrote it down. And the Prophet Muhammad had the habit of saying, listen, read it back to me to see whether you recorded it was true. There's an oral tradition passed on to those 4. But I don't want to go further on with Atman and others, but let's give you an idea about oral tradition, how things in ancient times were passed on. Now, when churches received each gospel, they also received information about that gospel's origins. Okay? Telling them whose eyewitness testimony this gospel represented. There's something wrong, this is not working. Because they received clear oral traditions when they received each book. When Christians began adding titles to those manuscripts, every congregation connected each gospel to the same author. You see, when the church was small, there was no need to now write where you got from, because word of mouth, oral tradition, the church was growing, and then heresy was coming in. So you need to decide now, hey, this to God, let's now write there where it's from, so that you would know if anything else comes in, we don't accept, we have to look at it and check it out. So the scribes who made copies of the Gospels for public reading in churches, and the churches for which the books were intended knew the authors associated with each Gospel. The core Gospels were not randomly selected from a large sample of Gospels. No. They were the standard. They were the standard by which, if any other material came in to say now, okay, we know who these authors are, we have, I would just maybe show you this now, etc., and then they'll compare those writings to the one that does. This was the standard. That you have a deed. As I said earlier on, there is Sahih, a deed, authentic, there's some weak, some very poor, but if an hadith contradicts the Quran, it's not accepted. So what the early Christians did was, similarly, oral traditions, etc., when other materials were coming in orally and by writing, the test was, the Pakat test was, what they held in the hand. What's recorded in the Gospels according to Mark is a testimony of Simon Peter, recorded and preserved by John Mark. Now, because John, Mark, and Luke were not the direct disciples of Jesus Christ, many reject and say they're not eyewitnesses. I got this book here for a special reason, and I'm going to use this book as illustration just now. Now, Luke's Gospel integrates written and oral sources carried by Paul's personal physician. So he was a follower of Paul. Wherever Paul went missing, he was there. So he had or eyewitness testimony of what was happening. Why took just Mark and Luke, because I'm going to spend more time on them, is because they were not the direct disciples of Jesus Christ. When the church received the gospel, they also received information about that gospel original, telling them whose eyewitness testimony this gospel was. He's learning on his own, no way. Okay? So every congregation connected to each gospel the same author. The scribes who made the copies of the gospels for public reading in churches and the churches for which the books were intended knew the authors associated with the book. The